Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel. Alright, please ignore the dry shampoo in my hair. I thought it was gonna just perk my hair up, and I can see that there's a massive like white cast now on it, which is the problem with the dry shampoo, but that is what that is if you see it. I know I look crazy today. I have been so busy recently. I was just in a cocktail competition up in Boston, and it was amazing. It was really, really awesome. A great experience. But I have been literally traveling back and forth and working and just doing a ton of stuff. So I am definitely very tired. So please excuse my appearance. But I really wanted to get this video filmed. I thought this was a very cool concept. A lot of times when I go on Goodreads, I always like to read books that start at a 3.8 or higher. Those always tell me when you have a general consensus that that is a high rating. And yet I find myself sometimes not picking up books because they have a 3.5 or a 3.4 rating. And then they end up becoming some of my favorite books ever. So here I have a list of 8 books that to me are 5-star reads that I absolutely adore and love, that actually don't have crazy high ratings on Goodreads. So for this, I chose a low rating as a 3.7 or below. I'm gonna be honest, all of these books are in between a 3.4 and a 3.7. I think it's very difficult to find books that really dip below the 3-star rating. I know that Nothing But Blackened Teeth does have like a 2.5 on Goodreads, but you know what? It didn't when I first read it. It actually had a pretty high rating. So some of these books are much newer, some of these books are older, and so they've definitely had kind of like a nice shift in readership, and it's not all about the hype of when they've come out. I don't think any of these are releases from this year, so there's also that. But yeah, let's dive in. I'm gonna list them from the highest rating that they have on Goodreads down to the lowest rating, and let's dive in. So my first book, I was actually stunned to see that it had a 3.6 rating on Goodreads. Now this is Gone to See the Riverman by Christopher Triana. If you follow me on Goodreads, you do know that I have given this a 4-star rating. However, this is one of my favorite books of all time. It is, in my opinion, a 5-star book, but I couldn't give it a 5-star just because there were some really disturbing concepts in this book, and I just didn't feel comfortable giving some of those concepts a perfect 5 stars. It made me really uncomfortable to read, and I think that that was reflected in my Goodreads review. But this is in fact one of my favorite books of all time. It is, in my opinion, the best thing Christopher Triana has ever written. It's probably up there in like my top 10 favorite books ever. And so I was stunned to see that this had a 3.68, and mainly because the reason I picked this book up was because of so many booktubers and book reviewers saying how absolutely amazing this novel is. It's a really short read. I'm actually going to try really hard not to read the backs of the books for any of these. I'm going to talk about why I love this book and why I think that it has a lower rating. And I'm going to say that the reason this book was sold to me was because a lot of people said it was one of the most disturbing books they've ever read, and I think that that is where this low rating comes from. The reason that I documented it as a 4-star rating is, again, because there is something so absolutely disturbing in the center of this novel, more so than anything else that happens. And this is pretty much from start to finish very unsettling, disturbing, uncomfortable book to read, but it is a beautiful book at the same time. It is so well done. It is so captivating. But I do have to say that I think that those disturbing images and some of the really disturbing concepts in this novel are definitely going to be what drop it to a lower rating. I love this book because I think it has one of the best twists I've ever seen in a story ever. Again, it is beautifully written. It does have this kind of southern gothic horror aspect to it. There's also these kind of cosmic Lovecraftian creatures that kind of just stay in their own sort of like backwoods southern realm, and I just adore this book. I struggle to talk about how much I love this book without talking about some of the key components that make this book so jarring and scary and unsettling. But this is the story about a woman who is a super fan of a serial killer and is doing one last favor for him in a river, and I think it's Alabama. I've looked it up before. It doesn't actually say in the book, but I have looked it up before. and things are not at all what they seem, and she has to take her sister along with her, who is not necessarily the most willing participant in what is going on. And I love it. But it is, at the end of the day, one of the most disturbing, unsettling books I've ever read. I read it so quickly, and there are definitely scenes that are seared into my brain that have stuck with me, that I can't get over, that I will truly never forget when I think about this book. And I would say that those scenes are definitely not for everybody, and probably what got it a 3.6 rating. Next up, I was stunned to see this, but this is The Devil Crept In by Anya Alborn, another one of my favorite books. This has a 3.66 rating. And I was thinking, like, oh, maybe it's because Anya Alborn does write very depressing and kind of disturbing stories, as does Christopher Triana. But I mean, Brother is my favorite book from Anya Alborn ever, and it is far, 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 far more disturbing than The Devil Crept In. So I was definitely shocked to see the lower rating on this. Now, the one thing that I can think about this story that might not work for people is it really is kind of two stories in one. We have the tale of a little boy who is trying to figure out where his cousin went. His cousin goes missing, and then when they eventually find him, he is nowhere near the same person that he used to be, and they're trying to kind of unravel the mystery behind that. But then at the same time, we have this whole side story about a woman who has a very, very strange and tumultuous relationship with her kind of evil child. That's how I want to leave it. And they're very well told stories, but I will say that the main story about the two little boys is far more captivating than that second story. That second story, I can see how somebody would think that might drag on a little bit, but I do think that it was a very, very nice additive to the type of story Anya Alborn is trying to tell. And when Anya Alborn writes stories, she always writes about this kind of fault with the family unit, and how the family unit is much more complex than normally meets the eye. We usually see kind of the perfect, like, Norman Rockwell home in a lot of stories, and Anya Alborn loves to take that concept and flip it on its head and ask what happens when you cannot trust the ones that you're supposed to love unconditionally. And I think that this book does an amazing job of asking that question from all different angles, and it is very bleak and it is very depressing, but it is one of my favorite things that Anya Alborn has ever written. So I was really stunned to see this one have a slightly lower rating as well, because I thought this was a pretty near perfect book. I really, really enjoyed that. But I do think that there are two very separate storylines, and they are very different in tone, even though they're basically talking about the same kind of overarching theme. So I can see how one storyline might not be as effective to a reader as the other one, but I did think that they worked very, very well. Alright, next up, unfortunately, we have another Anya Alborn, but that's okay, because I make these lists to encourage people to read books that they might not. And I definitely want to encourage everybody to read Anya Alborn, because I think she's a fantastic author. But this is Within These Walls. Now, this has a 3.62 on Goodreads. Again, all of these books are basically objective 5 stars for me. And this is the story about a journalist who moves into a house that was once inhabited by kind of a Manson family style cult to learn more about the cult. However, the let's say the imprint and memory of that cult is still very much alive within the house and is potentially influencing the people who come in contact with it. I love this novel because I think it is one of the best and most realistic and most chilling depictions of cults that I have ever read in any kind of story before. I was fascinated with it. It was very alluring in the way that the cults convince people to become members, but it was also very terrifying in the way that they're so convincing, and I didn't want to put this book down. I was really, really, really captivated reading about this kind of, again, 1970s style cult on the West Coast. And the only real thing that I can see is, again, there's kind of a fork in the road with this novel, where we have our main story with the writer and his family in the house, and then we have, obviously, the story of the cult and the flashbacks to the 1970s when the cult was operating and how it was operating. And to me, those flashbacks and that pivotal part of the story was far more interesting than the story about our main character. And again, this just goes back to what I was saying, The Devil Crept In. I can see how for some people, they might have been more captivated with one part of the story and kind of disappointed when a slower part of the story came out. To me, I thought it melded together very, very, very well. I was very invested in everything going on with the cult and how they were affecting the present day, and kind of the twists and turns that Anya Ahlborn put in here. And I really loved the idea of who is your family. Again, she talks all about familial horror, so we do have an actual family relationship in present day, but we are also contrasting and comparing it with the quote-unquote synthetic family that is created inside of a cult and what that means. And I just loved the commentary that Anya Ahlborn made in this novel, and I thought it was a very well done and scary novel. Okay, next up at 3.60, we have Rachel Harrison's Black Sheep. Alright, this is a pretty new release. I am a huge Rachel Harrison fan. Her biggest novel, I believe, is Cackle. I've read almost all of her books. I haven't read The Return yet, but it's on my list of books to read, and I love Rachel Harrison's voice. I think she is an amazing, amazing, amazing colloquial writer. Whenever I read her books, I feel like she is telling me a story. She's very much a millennial, and I feel, as a millennial, so connected to a lot of her characters and can relate very much to what they're going through. So I really, really do enjoy reading Rachel Harrison. However, I think the reason for a low rating on this is Rachel Harrison consistently writes unlikable characters. And every book I have ever read from Rachel Harrison, I pretty much hate the main characters. Now, Rachel Harrison is such a good writer that I don't care. I love reading her stories. I love seeing what happens to these kind of awful, self-centered people, and Black Sheep is definitely a book with probably the most amount of unlikable characters. Like, I really don't think there was like a single lead character in this story that I enjoyed. They were all awful, even as like the protagonist and the antagonist. While they were all very interesting and complex, none of them were people I wanted to root for. Nobody were people I wanted to care about. And I think that is probably where this book starts to get lower ratings. Another thing too is I thought the twist in the first third of this book was absolutely brilliant and funny and fantastic. I could also see how some people might either think it's a little bit predictable, even though I didn't predict it, or could also be kind of offended by it for various different ways. There's a lot of critiques on religion, especially Christianity, in this story, and this is another story that's almost borderline about a cult, but not, but it is about religious fanatics. And so you're kind of in this world that is very much criticizing organized religion, with really, really unlikable characters and kind of this very absurdist, over-the-top storyline that does pull in elements of supernatural. So I can see how this book would not work for somebody. It is also written very, very, very much in a millennial tone of voice. But I loved it. I loved reading about somebody who had kind of escaped her religious community, even though she was very much favored in the community, but she didn't want to be there, and goes out into the real world, isn't very, very successful, and that community tries to bring her back, even though she's unsure if she wants to go back because she doesn't believe in what they are doing. So I thought this is a great story, and again, it's very millennial, it's very funny, in a very dry sort of way. So it's definitely not a tone of book for everybody, but it was a tone of book that was absolutely for me, and I had so much fun reading that book. Okay, next up is Geralds Game by Stephen King. So this is a 3.57. This is one of my favorite things that Stephen King has ever written. It's up there with It and Misery and Salem's Lot. I adore this book. But I've always kind of known that it has a lower rating. It's not one of Stephen King's most famous books. Most of the book takes place in a single room, and it's a lot of flashbacks and inside of our main character's head. So I can understand why this wouldn't necessarily work for everybody. This is the story of a woman named Jessie who goes on a vacation with her husband to a remote cabin pretty much away from everybody else. They're kind of fooling around. He handcuffs her to the bed and has a heart attack. So she is now trapped, attached to the bed with no way to get help. And it's pretty much an entire story about what she does in that situation and if she can get out of it. And it's, again, a very, very layered book. We very much go deep into Jessie's past, her childhood, her marriage, her relationship with her family. And we work on the question of, is she slowly going insane in her dire situation? This book is filled with a lot of trigger warnings. So I can also see how many people might not work with this book in the same way. I can see that a lot of people might not vibe with this book in the same way that they might not vibe with Gone to See the Riverman. Again, trigger warnings, trigger warnings, trigger warnings. Please check those before reading these. But I thought this was very, very beautifully done. I think this is an incredibly feminist angle for Stephen King, somebody who in the 70s and 80s didn't always write women in the most favorable of light, but he's definitely changed his tune as he has gotten older. I know that his wife and a couple other women that were really, really close to him really helped him craft this novel and talk about their own personal experiences that he then was able to put into this book, and I adore this. I also think that the space cowboy is one of the scariest things that Stephen King has ever written. I remember reading this book and like just chills going up my spine as I was reading it because I was so freaked out by the space cowboy. And then as you learn more and more about what the space cowboy is, he just magically gets scarier and scarier and scarier. So I've always loved this book, but I can understand why this book might not be for everybody. But if you're looking for a lesser well-known Stephen King book that's also not like a doorstopper, it's like 400 pages, I think this is a fantastic book to pick up. Okay, next up, we're going to talk about My Heart is a Chainsaw. This is another one of my favorite books. This has a 3.54. Now, I am not a Stephen Graham Jones fan. I talk about this all the time on my channel. Stephen Graham Jones has written more books that I absolutely despise than books that I love, but this is the book that changed my mind on Stephen Graham Jones. This was a 5-star read for me. I blew through it. I love it. I wanted to love the series. I love the second book as well, but I really was let down by the third. And I think it's because Stephen Graham Jones is a very divisive author. You're either going to love what he writes or hate it. He has a very, very, very strange writing style. I've seen a lot of people say that it's just very, very conversational, as if he's like telling a story around a campfire. To me, it reads more like gonzo literature. It's very like gonzo journalism style writing. But it's very much all over the place. There's a lot of detail, there's a lot of characters, there's a lot going on, and there's not always a lot of explicit explanation. There's a lot of inferring or breezing over something that might be very important and having to come back later. But I think when he was writing My Heart is a Chainsaw, which is the story of a 17-year-old girl who thinks that a slasher is about to take place in her hometown and uses her knowledge and obsession with 1980s and 70s slasher films to help navigate through this awful situation, while writing like essays about like her love of film and horror movies. I think by writing through the lens of a 17-year-old girl and having to kind of tone back the language that Stephen Graham Jones would normally use, it makes this book much more accessible to readers who might not enjoy his style. I really, really enjoyed this. It felt very much like a slasher. It was very exciting. It was very just quirky and fun. It felt very much to me like a teen-centric novel talking about very much adult topics, which I really, really loved. He, again, wrote a very, very feminist storyline about a woman who goes through quite a lot of traumatic things that are far scarier because they can happen in reality than things that happen in this kind of slasher verse that she has. So I really, really loved this book, and again, I went into this book thinking I was going to hate it. I only read it because it was sent to me, and I ended up absolutely adoring it, and it changed my mind on Stephen Graham Jones for at least a little bit. And so while I'm still very hesitant with his writing overall, I do think that this is the best thing that he has written, and I do think it is worth reading, even if you don't typically like his style. However, I can see how that style is still very much translated into this book. And if you are not a fan of Stephen Graham Jones's writing, it still might not work for you. And the other thing too is, again, if you're a huge Stephen Graham Jones fan, this definitely departs from his normal, very over-the-top style. At the same time too, Jade's a teenager. She talks like a teenager, she acts like a teenager. There is a lot of teen speak, especially in those slasher history lessons. This book does kind of expect you to have a decent amount of slasher knowledge, so I can see how that would definitely split views on what people think of this novel. However, I love it. I think it's a great read, and I will always say that even though I'm not a Stephen Graham Jones fan, My Heart is a Chainsaw is a fantastic novel. Alright, I have two more. Okay, so I just read this just a couple months ago, and this is Looking Glass Sound by Catriona Ward. Now, this is a 3.49, which literally blows my mind because I think the first, 120 pages of this book are like a absolutely truly perfect coming of age novella. This book is very twisty and turny. It is a complete critique and commentary on who owns a story. Once a story has been told, or once a story has been experienced, who has the ability to write that down and kind of capitalize off of that tale. It's a really, really interesting critique, again, on like the literary world, but at the same time, at the core root of it is a really crazy, whimsical, almost House of Leaves-ish mystery. This is like a book within a book within a book kind of thing. But then we also have this like truly gut-wrenching, amazing, beautiful coming-of-age story at the first 120 pages. And if the first 120 pages was the only thing that was in this book, this would still be a 5-star read for me. The added mystery and kind of convoluted twisting and turning and complete stylistic change and introduction of new characters that follows those first 120 pages, to me was just an added bonus of getting to continue to be with these characters and kind of see what happened. But I absolutely loved and devoured this book. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. I thought it was very tragic, very well done. And once you really dig into the fact that it is also a commentary, some of those moments where you're kind of like, I don't understand why that was there, or why this character needed to do X, Y, and Z, like, it makes a little bit more sense. It does tend to get lost sometimes where the actions of characters don't necessarily make sense unless you're looking at this book through the lens of what it's making a commentary on. But overall, I thought the story was absolutely beautiful, and again, gut-wrenching. And I love Wilder so much. I think Wilder Harlow is just an absolutely incredible character. And while Catriona Ward does kind of write these very twisty stories pretty often, The Last House on the Street is probably her most well-known. It's definitely something to know going into her books, because nothing is ever going to be as it seems with her, and I feel like that can also turn a lot of readers off. But I thought this was absolutely fantastic. This is my favorite thing that Catriona Ward has ever written. I liked it more than Sundial. I liked it more than The Last House on Needless Street. I didn't love Little Eve, so I definitely liked it more than that. Alright, and last but not least, this is my lowest rating, and this makes me so sad, but we have Daphne by Josh Malerman. This came out in 2022. I literally just read it like last month. I love this book. So this is the story of a high school girl who at a sleepover hears about this kind of urban legend where this woman comes and attacks high school students, but she only comes if you think about her, and that thought gets into our main character Kit's mind and all of her teammates' minds and wreaks havoc on the town. Now, I thought this book was absolutely amazing. I can understand a lot of reasons, though, why this would have a lower rating. For one, this book focuses primarily on a women's basketball team. So if you don't like basketball, there's going to be a lot of basketball in this book, which is a weird thing to have in a horror story. I know that Stephen Graham Jones also does it in The Only Good Indians, and it's actually something that I have a huge issue with in that book. But I think it works really nicely for the metaphor in this book, and it's a very nice vessel to carry this concept along with. Another major thing in this story is, I think, the ending for a lot of people. This book is very, very, very dependent on the fact that it is a metaphor for panic attacks and anxiety. And this character of Daphne is very much so a living incarnation of Josh Malerman's own concept of anxiety. And when you know that, reading the ending I think works really, really, really well. If you take that away and just read this book at face value, I think the ending falls flat. Again, this was a 5-star read for me because I was so invested in this analogy, and a lot of the slower parts of the book are pretty much deepening that analogy, that concept of humanizing and personifying panic attacks. And there's this amazing scene in this book where Kit listens to the Nine Inch Nails record for the first time and has the first panic attack she's ever experienced. And it's a very, very slow kind of jog through the novel, that whole chapter. But to me, it was something that I thought was so beautifully done because I've experienced something like that. And it was a really interesting way to see somebody put to words something I've experienced, even though this was far more extreme. So I can understand how this book might not work for somebody who has never experienced what this book is talking about. It's very much targeting a specific age group, a specific type of fear, a specific type of mental disorder, and I think it's really, really, really well done, and that's what makes it so much scarier. But that being said, the actual metaphor itself doesn't perfectly translate into the story, and you can tell that Josh Malerman wanted the metaphor to be stronger than the substance of the story itself, and that's where I think it starts to get lost. However, if you want a book where the story itself is as strong and as scary as the metaphor that he is writing, check out his latest book, Incidents Around the House. I think it's my favorite book of the year, and I wouldn't have read it had I not read this and been like, whoa, Josh Malerman is actually a really good writer, because I did not like Bird Box, and I know that's his claim to fame, but I didn't like Bird Box. I thought Goblin was fun, but it was more short stories than an actual novel. Picked this up and it blew me away, and it got me to Incidents Around the House, and now I'm a huge Josh Malerman person, so I'm definitely going to be reading as much from him as I can in the near future. Anyway, those are my 8 novels of books that I love. Again, they are some of my favorite books. They are 5-star ratings that don't get all of the love that I think they should on Goodreads. Let me know if you guys have any. I think I'm going to do a video on the reverse, books that have high ratings on Goodreads that I don't like, but we will see about that. Anyways, that is all that I have for you guys today. As always, I try to post every Monday and Thursday, and sometimes on Saturdays. And if you enjoy these videos, please hit the like and subscribe buttons down below, and I will catch you all in the next one. Mwah!